Okay, YouTube. Well, mostly my freshman class. In Mr. Hansen's room. The Chapter 5 test is coming up this Friday. And I am here to help you ace that test so we can get that pizza party or donut party if Katie Ann gets it. Or both. Maybe we can have a pizza donut party. Get fat both ways. Anyway, we have to go. I'm going over two things today. A, enlightened thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which you probably can't see this anyway. It says Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And B, Frederick the Great, like enlightened despots. If enlightened thinkers or philosophers were people who came up with enlightenment ideas like no torture, stuff like that, freedom of speech, big one, really big one, got the whole part of that is the First Amendment. Enlightened despots like Frederick the Great are people who were affected by that. Frederick the Great was affected by Voltaire very closely. Voltaire was a member of his court for some time. We'll start with the enlightened despots. Sorry, I'm coming down with something. Anyway, we'll start with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was the person who came up with wrote the social contract. Wrote the book. I don't think he actually wrote the social contract. I mean, he might have came up with the idea. Anyway, he despised political and well, I'm going to tell you just their significance. Okay, I'm not going to go into every little detail. Now, he was the guy who came up with popular sovereignty, common good, and majority, the will of the majority. So, it's like this. If you don't get what popular sovereignty is, it is this. Popular sovereignty is, say we have 15 people, and one person decides, I want to have Friday as ice cream day. And the other guys are like, no. Well, they put it up for a vote. And in that 15 people, 10 people decide they want to have ice cream day. 5 people decide they don't. So, with popular sovereignty, the 10 people would get their way. So, it's more like just a democracy. Popular sovereignty is just voting, and the majority is the ones that get their way. That's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Don't forget it. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay. Next is Mary Wollstonecraft. She was a woman enlightenment thinker. I know, that's surprising, isn't it? Mary doesn't even sound like a woman's name. Anyway, she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And she just wanted equal education for boys and girls. She wanted equality with women and men. Next is Caesar Borgia or whatever. Don't know how to pronounce that. He wrote on crimes and punishment. His big thing, he was the whole no cruel and unusual punishment in our government and our Bill of Rights. Or in our Constitution. I believe it was the Constitution, not the Bill of Rights. I don't know. Ask Mr. Hansen. That's not all that you're going to need to know for him is no cruel and unusual punishment. He was the one who did not like torture. He was the one who started the idea of torture being bad. And he believed that instead of torturing people or giving he believed that if you stole something, there's different worse stuff like that. He believed that, let me read this real quick. He believed that the people should be in prison and help with, kind of like how we now have, when you're in prison, you see the people out with orange coats picking up trash. He believes that people should be doing stuff like that when they're in prison, being more for utility and stuff like that. Baron de Montesquieu. Okay, if you don't know Montesquieu, you are screwed for this test, but I can save you. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of Laws, but what you need to know about him is separation of powers and checks and balances. Say it with me. Separation of powers, checks and balances. Separation of powers, checks and balances. Important. John Locke. John Locke, we went over this. He was one of the big guys too. He wrote the True Treatise of Government. He believed in natural rights of life, liberty, and property, that those were people's natural rights, and he also believed in the right to rebel. So, he believed, here's technically all that was John Locke. He believed that people had God-given natural rights from birth, and that the government's only duty was to protect those rights. And if they did not protect those rights, if they started impeding upon those rights, we have the right to rebel. That's all you need to know for John Locke. Government, he believed in natural rights. Government protected natural rights. Government did not protect natural rights. We rebel. Immanuel Kant. He was a German philosopher who wrote The Critic of Pure Reason. He was the first person to describe the period as the Enlightenment. Adam Smith. He wrote The Wealth of Nations. Okay, Adam Smith is my favorite. And that's just because I'm crazy. Got my own little craziness going on. Adam Smith believed in a laissez-faire government, which just means hands off. No, the government should be doing nothing with the economics. And he believed that the free market should regulate the government, meaning, you know, the whole, want and then need, like, I can't think of the words for it right now. He believes that the free market should regulate the government, so if people want something, and the availability of that something, so if the thing is like, if there's lots of it, then, and a lot of people, and not that many people want it, the price would go down. And if there wasn't that much, and a lot of people wanted it, the price would go up. He didn't believe that the king should decide a price, or that the government should decide a price. He believed that small businesses and business and free market should decide their own prices and regulations. And this he called free market or capitalism. He was not a philosopher, he was a physiocrat by definition, meaning he was somebody who philosophized about economy. Next one is Thomas Hobbes. He wrote the Leviathan, and in the Leviathan, there was something about the people being the power behind the king. And then he did not support the divine right theory, meaning the divine right theory was that the God chose the king, and the king is the guy who rules you. He presented the concept of a social contract. He was the one who came up with the social contract. But he believed that people gave up their rights in order to live in an organized society. Some people don't believe that. Voltaire. This is a pretty important guy. He's not as much as my Adam Smith, but he's pretty dang important. He criticized the powerful institution. Okay, the biggest thing you gotta know about Voltaire, he was a very outspoken dude, and he believed in the freedom of speech because he was just so outspoken. Like, he had his own ideas, but he supported freedom of speech, and a good way to remember that he supported freedom of speech was when he said, "I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which are very wise words. Okay, that was our enlightened thinkers, enlightened philosophers, and physiocrat, because there's one physiocrat. Next, we have enlightened despots, like Frederick the Great. Now, I'm going to do enlightened despots. Kings and queens affected by... Enlightened despots. Kings and queens affected by enlightened ideology. I'm going to do Catherine the Great first. She wasn't called the Great for nothing. Okay. Russian law and government reform. She reformed law and government in Russia. Russia. I believe it was Russia. She criticized the institution of serfdom. She read the works of Voltaire and Montesquieu and imported Western culture to Russia. Okay, next I'm doing Maria Theresa. She established the national army, limited the power of the church, revised the tax system, reduced power. Okay, she did not support serfdom, but she didn't feel that she could do anything about it at that time. So what she did was she reduced the power of lords over serfs. And she improved the education system. Now, after her comes along Joseph II, and that's her son. They were the rulers of Austria, and he would disguise himself as a peasant to see how people thought of issues. He'd go out, look like every average Joe, be like, "Hey, what do you think about this and this?" And they would tell him. So he would actually try to do stuff about it. But guess what? When he was the ruler of Austria, he abolished serfdom. So he probably made his mother real proud. And he continued in his mother's footsteps to modernize the Austria's government. Okay, last but not least is Frederick the Great. And he was the ruler of Prussia, and he loved Voltaire. He was like, Voltaire was his main man. Like, you know, they were just awesome work buddies and all. Anyway, he despised torture. He tolerated religious differences. He allowed the freedom of his court, and Voltaire was in his court. That's how much they were awesome together. And he made a more efficient Prussian government. Now, that is what we have on enlightened despots, and I hope that we all pass this test. You guys are awesome. See ya.